Good evening. It's Friday the 17th of October and here's what's making news around the world on World News Tonight. Bangladesh trial. Bangladesh demands death penalty for former Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina over protest crackdown. Ukraine summit. Trump and Putin agree to meet in Budapest to discuss Ukraine conflict. Centenarian Barista. 100-year-old Barista continues serving coffee with pride after 65 years.
From Colombo, this is World News Tonight with Amarsha Fernando.
And a very good evening once again. Bangladesh's International Crimes Tribunal has demanded the death penalty for former Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina, accusing her for orchestrating a violent crackdown on student-led protests in 2024 that resulted in over 1,400 deaths. Hasina, currently exiled in India, faces charges including crimes against humanity and contempt of court.
Former Bangladeshi Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina, who led the country for 15 years, is facing one of the most severe legal challenges of her career. Prosecutors have accused her of ordering security forces to use lethal weapons against student-led protests in July last year, a crackdown that left over 1,400 people dead. The unrest initially began over civil service job quotas but quickly escalated into a nationwide movement demanding her removal from power. A leaked audio clip reportedly captures Hasina directing forces to open fire, though she denies any wrongdoing. Hasina is being tried alongside former Interior Minister Asadusman Khan Kamal and ex-police chief Chaudhry Abdullah Al-Maum. While Chaudhry pleaded guilty in July, Hasina and Kamal remain in hiding, with prosecutors seeking the death penalty. Hasina has already served 6 months for contempt of court and faces separate corruption charges. Her defense argues that police were responding to violent actions by protesters, framing the incident as a law and order measure rather than premeditated violence. The trial carries significant political weight as Bangladesh approaches elections in February, with opposition BNP positioned as a frontrunner. Hasina's party, the Awami League, has been barred from political activity, including contesting in elections. The case highlights deep divisions in Bangladeshi politics and raises international concerns over human rights, legal accountability, and the use of excessive force in suppressing political dissent. Observers say the verdict could reshape the country's political landscape.
In Kabul, hospitals are treating injured civilians following deadly cross-border clashes between Pakistan and Afghanistan. Airstrikes and ground fighting have reportedly killed more than a dozen people, including in Afghan capital. The escalating violence has heightened regional tensions, raising urgent concerns over civilian safety and the need for diplomatic intervention.
Injured victims were being treated in the emergency ward of a hospital in Kabul after airstrikes and ground fighting between Afghanistan and Pakistan killed at least a dozen. Abdul Kabir recalled the scene vividly.
Children, women, the elderly and young people were lying on the street. Right there, a retired general who is in the next ward, and our neighbour too, was also lying on the road. In short, it was a very terrible day.
The South Asian neighbours engaged in ground fighting, and Pakistan launched airstrikes before the two countries agreed to a 48-hour truce on Wednesday. Although they have clashed in the past, the latest fighting is their worst in decades. The recent friction erupted after Islamabad demanded that Kabul rein in militants who had stepped up attacks in Pakistan. The Taliban denies the charge and accuses the Pakistani military of spreading misinformation. Islamabad denies the accusations. In Spin Boldak, residents gathered to pay their respects to the victims.
The attack was carried out by Pakistan. We are ordinary civilians. There are no military posts here and no military personnel live here. Only women and children were in the house and they were killed. We have about 13 casualties, including the dead, and 5 people were killed.
On Thursday, the United Nations assisted mission in Afghanistan called for, quote, all parties to bring a lasting end to hostilities. Pakistani Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif said Islamabad was ready to hold talks with Afghanistan to resolve their conflict. There was no immediate response from Kabul, with an Afghan Defense Ministry spokesperson saying only that the ceasefire was holding so far.
Australia's mineral resources are expected to play a central role in upcoming talks between Prime Minister Anthony Albanese and US President Donald Trump. Analysts suggest that critical minerals vital for technology and defense industries could shape bilateral agreements, highlighting the strategic importance of Australia's resources in global trade and geopolitics.
Steps away from the White House and days away from an all-important visit.
There could not be a more important time to engage with our international colleagues and counterparts as we all seek to navigate this global economic uncertainty.
The Treasurer and the Defence Industry Minister in Washington and laying the groundwork for Anthony Albanese's long-awaited formal talks with the US President, where trade, tariffs and security top the topics list.
We've made it clear for some time now that we believe that these tariffs on Australia are unnecessary and unwarranted.
Australia remains subject to America's baseline tariff of 10%, our steel and aluminium imports under a 50% duty, and there's a 100% levy on pharmaceuticals. One potential leverage point is Australia's abundance of rare earths. The US wants a stable supply of critical minerals, and we have them on tap.
We know that American companies desperately need critical minerals, and Australia is very well placed to service that need.
When it comes to security, a major question mark remains over whether the AUKUS submarine pact will stay afloat. The Pentagon tonight in the final stages of its America First review.
Its release is imminent. I was meeting with senior leaders in Congress who were evangelical about the importance of AUKUS, who expressed real confidence that it will continue.
Donald Trump has hosted more than a dozen world leaders in the Oval Office this year. The one consistency is unpredictability, and that leaves a lot at stake for Australia.
Cambodia is set to deport 59 South Korean nationals involved in illegal job scam operations amidst growing concerns over the abduction and confinement of citizens. Prime Minister Hun Manet met a South Korean delegation pledging intensified efforts to combat scams and protect victims through joint cooperation with Seoul.
Cambodia is preparing to deport 59 South Korean nationals involved in job scam cases. According to a report by AFP, Cambodia's national police announced that the deportation will take place on Friday in cooperation with the Korean embassy in Phnom Penh. The individuals were either rescued from cyber scam centers or detained for related crimes. The move comes as Seoul has dispatched a joint government response team to Cambodia to tackle the surge in job scams that have led to the abduction and confinement of Korean nationals. So far, about 80 South Koreans are missing or unaccounted for, while more than 60 have been confined in the country in connection with such schemes. On Thursday, Cambodian Prime Minister Hun Manet met with the South Korean delegation and expressed deep regret over the recent torture and death of a South Korean national in an illegal online job scam. He pledged to intensify efforts to protect South Koreans and to arrest suspects still at large. Hun, who heads Cambodia's Commission for Combating Online Scams, promised closer cooperation with Seoul to fight these crimes. Leading the South Korean response team is Second Vice Foreign Minister Kim Jin-ah, who voiced strong concerns over the situation and called for active measures to protect Korean citizens.
I requested active measures and cooperation to protect our citizens and eradicate these crimes in Cambodia.
She also highlighted the importance of Korea-Cambodia Joint Scam Response Task Force, which includes key agencies like the Korean National Police Agency, to work jointly with Cambodian authorities to root out these criminal networks. The coordinated efforts mark a significant step by both governments to address the widening job scam crisis affecting South Korean nationals in Cambodia.
US President Donald Trump is set to visit South Korea from October 29th to 30th for the APEC leaders meeting in Gyeongju. A summit with President Lee Jae-myung is anticipated, with possible talks involving China's President Xi Jinping as global trade and political tensions shape the diplomatic agenda.
U.S. President Donald Trump is expected to visit South Korea from October 29th to 30th, in time for the APEC leaders meeting in the city of Gyeongju. That's according to South Korea's National Security Advisor, Ri Sung-nak, on Thursday, adding that a South Korea-US summit is expected during that time when asked about the issue. He declined to further comment, saying a change in schedule is possible. When asked about the possibility of a meeting between Trump and North Korean leader Kim Jong-un around that time, the security advisor said he had no knowledge on the matter. In 2019, Trump met Kim at the DMZ, 4 months after their summit fell apart in Hanoi. On a U.S.-China summit, we said Trump could meet his Chinese counterpart Xi Jinping during his stay in Korea, without giving further details. Talks are reportedly in the final stages to invite the leaders of the U.S. and China to South Korea later this month, in the form of a state visit. And according to diplomatic sources, bilateral talks with President Lee Jae-myung are being arranged. Lee is expected to meet Trump on the 29th and Xi on the 30th. The upcoming APEC meeting comes at a time of growing uncertainties in global politics and trade, amid a tug-of-war trade talks between Seoul and Washington, as well as heightened trade tensions between Washington and Beijing.
Time for a short commercial break now. We'll be right back with more world news. And welcome back. Israel and Hamas are trading blame over alleged violations of US-mediated ceasefire as preparations continue for the possible reopening of Gaza's Rafah crossing with Egypt. While Israel signals readiness to allow limited movements for Palestinians, no date has been confirmed, raising concerns of stalled humanitarian access and fragile truce conditions.
Israel said on Thursday it was preparing for the reopening of Gaza's Rafah crossing with Egypt to let Palestinians in and out, amid a fragile ceasefire with Hamas. A dispute over the return of hostages' bodies held by Hamas threatened to derail the truce. Families of some of the slain hostages, whose bodies were returned to Israel, laid them to rest on Thursday. Hamas has handed over 10 bodies and said it handed over all bodies it could recover. But Israel said one body was not that of a hostage and demanded that the militant group return the bodies of 19 hostages it had not handed over. The armed wing of Hamas said it requires the admission of heavy machinery and excavating equipment into the Israel-blocked Palestinian enclave after much of it was reduced to rubble. Jaco Cilliers, a United Nations Development Program special representative, said there were some 60 million US tons of debris in Gaza.
This is equal to 13 pyramids of Giza, just to give you an indication of the challenge that will be required as well. Only once the debris is removed can one start with the reconstruction and also the humanitarian needs.
Meanwhile, a senior Hamas official on Thursday accused Israel of violating the ceasefire by killing at least 24 people in shootings since Friday, and said a list of such violations was handed over to mediators. The Israeli military did not immediately respond. It had previously said that some Palestinians have ignored warnings not to approach Israeli ceasefire positions, and troops, quote, opened fire to remove the threat. While some aid began trickling in on Wednesday, the UN said it was nowhere near enough for the 2.2 million mostly homeless population. Palestinians in Khan Yunis said that they are now facing the reality of displacement. The real war started after the war, I believe, because today our suffering has increased, said this man, adding that they are waiting for aid, but nothing has come. Israel has said the next phase of US President Donald Trump's 20-point plan to end the war calls for Hamas to give up its weapons, which it has so far refused to do. Hamas has instead launched a security crackdown in urban areas vacated by Israeli forces, demonstrating its power through public executions and clashes with local armed clans. On Thursday, Trump said in a Truth Social post that if Hamas continued to kill people in Gaza, then, quote, we will have no choice but to go in and kill them. Trump did not offer details on how he would follow through on that threat.
President Donald Trump announced plans to meet Russian President Vladimir Putin in Budapest for a new summit addressing the ongoing Ukraine war. The meeting comes amidst disputes over U.S. military support for Kyiv, raising global attention on potential diplomatic breakthroughs or escalations in the conflict.
U.S. President Donald Trump and Russian President Vladimir Putin agreed on Thursday to another summit on the war in Ukraine. After a more than 2-hour phone conversation that he called productive, Trump said he could meet with his Russian counterpart within the next 2 weeks in Budapest. The Kremlin confirmed plans for the meeting, though neither side provided a date. The surprise development came as Moscow feared fresh U.S. military support for Kyiv, with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky headed to the White House on Friday to push for just that, including U.S.-made long-range Tomahawk missiles. A Kremlin aide said that during the call, Putin told Trump that supplying long-range missiles to Ukraine would harm the peace process and damage U.S.-Russia ties. Trump later joked about the matter with reporters.
Well, of course, what do you think he's going to say? Please sell Tomahawks? No, he doesn't want Tomahawk is a vicious weapon. It's a vicious, offensive, incredibly destructive weapon. Nobody wants Tomahawks shot at him.
Zelensky, already in Washington, said Putin's decision to seek talks showed he was on the defensive. In a post on X, he said, quote, "We can already see that Moscow is rushing to resume dialogue as soon as it hears about Tomahawks." Kyiv and Moscow have, of late, been escalating their war with massive attacks on energy infrastructure. Ukraine is seeking missiles that would put Moscow and other major Russian cities within its range of fire. The White House had seemed in recent days to be increasingly frustrated with Putin and leaning toward granting Zelensky fresh support. Yet Trump's conciliatory tone following the Russia call left in question the near-term likelihood of assistance and reignited European fears of U.S. capitulation to Moscow. Since taking office in January, Trump has regularly threatened action against Russia, only to delay those steps after talks with Putin.
In Madagascar, citizens are welcoming the country's new president, viewing his election a pivotal step forward, long-awaited political change. Many hope his leadership will bring stability, economic progress and reform after years of uncertainty. The peaceful transition signals a renewed sense of optimism across the nation's diverse population.
A return to calm following weeks of unrest. Military personnel patrolled the streets of Antananarivo a day after Madagascar's president was toppled by the army. Speaking to journalists in his barracks, the country's new strongman, Colonel Michael Ranjaniri, said he would take on the vacant position of head of state and was expected to be sworn in the coming days.
We had to take responsibility because there's nothing left in this country. No president, no head of the Senate, no government. According to the ruling issued by the High Constitutional Court, I'm taking the position of president.
Immediately after seizing power on Tuesday, Ranjaniri announced the dissolution of all of the country's institutions, with the exception of the National Assembly. He also vowed to draft a new constitution and to quickly appoint a prime minister tasked with forming a civilian government, without giving a precise time frame. The military power grab was largely welcomed in the capital, where protesters had for weeks been calling on President Ange Radzoel to step down. In the country's north too, Madagascans celebrated the takeover and expressed hopes the new leadership would bring about real change.
It feels like we've just been released from prison. I'm truly relieved that the president is no longer in power. But this is also a message to his successor. Learn from this and don't make the same mistakes.
France's foreign ministry on Wednesday called on Madagascar's new authorities to show restraint and responsibility and to preserve democracy and the rule of law, but didn't openly condemn the military takeover.
In Nairobi, at least 4 people were killed as Kenyan security forces opened fire to disperse thousands of mourners gathered for opposition leader Raila Odinga. His death sparked widespread chaos at the airport and stadium, intensifying political tensions and prompting urgent calls for accountability and calm amidst mounting public outrage.
Several people were shot dead in Kenya after security forces fired in the air and lobbed tear gas to disperse mourners at a stadium, according to a police source and local media. Thousands had gathered to view the body of deceased opposition leader Raila Odinga. Odinga, a major political figure for decades, died on Wednesday, aged 80, in India, where he had been receiving medical treatment. After his body arrived at Nairobi's international airport on Thursday, chaos erupted as mourners surged onto the runway. It prompted a 2-hour suspension of airport operations. Thousands lined the streets as crowds also tried to breach Parliament, where the government had originally scheduled the public viewing. Mourners gathered at the gates of the stadium before pushing through and then taking cover as shots were fired by soldiers on guard. Though mainly known as an opposition figure, Odinga became Prime Minister in 2008. He also struck a political pact with President William Ruto last year in a career of shifting alliances.
Time for a short commercial break now. We'll be right back with more world news. And welcome back. In Australia, an animal sanctuary is celebrating the arrival of two unusual yet adorable residents, tawny frogmouth chicks. Often mistaken for puppets or dust bunnies, these fluffy newborns have captured global curiosity. Despite their quirky appearance, zookeepers assure they're perfectly healthy and undeniably charming, drawing smiles from visitors and wildlife enthusiasts alike.
An animal sanctuary in Australia announced the births of two new residents. But what are they? Muppets? They're actually tawny frogmouth chicks. But don't worry if you mistake them for a stuffed toy or something else.
They kind of look like a dust bunny you might find behind the back of your couch, or if anyone's familiar with the Muppets or Sesame Street, if you kind of think of those sorts of creatures with big eyes and weird body shapes.
The chicks hatched 3 days apart, so it's been an exciting few days for the Healesville Sanctuary. But no one is more excited than the new parents.
Tiny and Kermit are really attentive parents, so we tend to find that Kermit does a bulk of the work during the day, so he'll be sitting on that nest, feeding those chicks regularly, and then they have pretty good swap over of the parenting.
A team effort to raise the next generation of species ambassadors.
At nearly 101 years old, Anna Pozzi stands behind the same counter she has been for 65 years in Nebuino, Italy. Recognized as the country's longest-serving barista, she opened the cafe with her late husband and continues to welcome new generations of customers with unwavering dedication.
You can find Anna Pozzi in the same place she's been for the past 65 years, behind the counter at her bar in Nebuino, Italy, serving coffee. But that wasn't the beginning of her career as a barista. Once I finished school, I immediately went to work with my uncles who had restaurants in Genoa. So I started working there at the age of 18, and I've always done this job. Coming up on her 101st birthday, Pozzi is recognized as the longest-serving barista in the country. She opened her bar with her husband, but she's been running it since he died 51 years ago. She's outlived most of her original clientele, but she says now she gets to serve tourists who come to her town just to meet the oldest barista. She says interacting with people is the best part of her job, unless you rub her the wrong way. I like it because I'm surrounded by people. Then, I'm a bit of a peculiar person. I don't like everyone, so I unwelcome them. When I don't like someone, I make sure they don't come back. So if she doesn't run you off, consider yourself lucky to have made a friend in Anna Pozzi.
And with that, we come to the end of today's edition of World News Tonight. With the hopes of seeing you again, I'm Amasha Fernando, and we leave you tonight with the visuals of Zulu stitching reimagined for modern fashion. Also, don't forget to send us your feedback through email at feedback.ad24english@derana.lk or via WhatsApp at 076 805 7933. Thank you for watching and have a great night.